Hi guys, this is part one where I'm going to be ranking all of the historical and fantasy TV series that I watched in 2022. You guys, there is nothing I love more than watching a good historical period drama or a good fantasy TV show. I am just a sucker for that sort of thing. So yeah, this is going to be a three-part series where I'm going to essentially be ranking everything that I watched last year in 2022 that is related in some manner to either being a historical or a period drama show or a fantasy TV show. Um, and I have 32 shows to rank, you guys. 32. I did this same video last year for the year of 2021. I thoroughly had a great time putting that video together and kind of reminiscing about all the great things that I watched. So I did. I wanted to do the same thing this year because it just seemed like a fun idea. And it seemed like there were quite a few of you last year that liked it as well. So yeah, let's first start off with the rules, if you will. Let's get into that real quick. First up, the show obviously has to be either a historical fiction show or a fantasy TV series. I decided to group fantasy in with this because sometimes fantasy has that historical fiction aesthetic that looks quite nice. Next up, the show has to have been set pre-2000s. If the show took place post 2000s, it was not included on this list. So that would include something like The Staircase, unfortunately. That did not make the cut for this list because The Staircase technically took place in 2001. Next up, the shows that needed to make this list needed to have concluded their series before I got these videos up. So for instance, something like Willow was able to make the list because it concluded right before I got this list done. But something like the Winchesters or Walker Independence, those only got halfway through their seasons, so that is why they are not on this list. Next up, these rankings, these are solely based on just my personal enjoyment and whatever entertainment I got. In some ways, the ranking is a bit arbitrary, and the ranking could fluctuate if my mood just depended on it. So these rankings are solely based off of whatever personal enjoyment entertainment I got from them. Next up, everything that is on this list either was released in the year of 2022, or if it was something that I watched for the very first time, but it was released in a prior year, it still made this list. But there is nothing on this ranking that is a rewatch. For instance, I had a rewatch of Leonardo this year, but that technically aired last year, so that made my list for last year. Once again, no rewatches. So that is it for the ruling of how I went about putting this video together and whatnot. So yeah, let's get going, you guys. As I said, this is going to be a three-part series. First part being released Monday, today, next part being released on Wednesday, and the third part being released on Friday. At number 32, That Dirty Black Bag. Far off in the west, bounty hunter Red Bill searches for the man who slew his mother. In nearby Greenvale, where it hasn't rained for years, local farmer Steve finds gold beneath his land, and Sheriff McCoy comes upon a small fortune. Starring Dominic Cooper, Douglas Booth, and Christian Cook. Oh boy, you guys, this was definitely the most disappointing viewing I had in all of 2022. And not just in regards to historical fiction, fantasy type shows, just even amongst other types of genres of shows I watched. That Dirty Black Bag, unfortunately, was definitely the most disappointing show of the year for me. I was absolutely looking forward to this show. Many people were making a big deal because Dominic Cooper, this was the first thing he had done after Preacher, and a lot of people really loved Preacher and his role in Preacher and what he did with that role. So a lot of people were really looking forward to this show, mostly for Dominic Cooper. And yeah, I hated this show, you guys. I did not really like it that much. It had its moments that I did enjoy for the most part, but the show I found to be incredibly meandering in places, rather plotting with the plot. I didn't really particularly care for the characters, which is a shame because I didn't like the characters, but I love all the actors. This is such an incredible cast of actors, and what's weird, the majority, you guys, the majority of the actors on this show, considering that it's a show that takes place in the west of America, pretty much every single actor is from the UK. I don't know how that happened. So I was primarily looking forward to the show because of the huge UK cast. And just about everybody in the show I have seen in something, in some other British TV drama. But yeah, Dirty Black Bag, if it gets canceled, I'm not going to be sad about it because, yeah, this was a very, very disappointing first season. At number 31, The First Lady follows the most impactful and world-changing decisions in the United States through the eyes of First Ladies Michelle Obama, Betty Ford, and Eleanor Roosevelt, starring Viola Davis, Michelle Pfeiffer, and Gillian Anderson. This was another show that I found to be, unfortunately, just not really my cup of tea in some ways. Once again, there were things about the show that I did like and I found enjoyable, but on many occasions, once again, I found the show to be a little meandering and plotting sometimes. And what the show was trying to do, it was trying to focus on these three specific first ladies, Eleanor Roosevelt and Michelle Obama and Betty Ford. It was trying to kind of tie in certain types of thematic sort of things, trying to tie in all three first ladies, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. Sometimes it just felt a little weird how they were trying to kind of force the stories together with some sort of common message they were trying to share. And like I said, sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. And more often than not, sometimes the show felt a little preachy. And I hate things that are like trying to preach at you some sort of message, you know. A good show, when it has a message, it's doing it in a very intelligent, subtle way that treats you, the viewer, as intelligent, you know. And sometimes I felt like this show is almost kind of treating the viewer like we were a little stupid or something. I don't know. Um, and weirdly enough, because I went into this show really expecting to be all into the Eleanor Roosevelt stuff because I really like Eleanor Roosevelt as a first lady. But weirdly enough, I ended this show really liking Michelle Pfeiffer's portrayal of Betty Ford. I didn't know anything about Betty Ford going into this show, and I really liked the new nuance that Michelle Pfeiffer gave to Betty Ford and whatnot. And then I think one of the biggest disappointments of the show was definitely Viola Davis's portrayal of Michelle Obama, you guys. Her portrayal of Michelle Obama was very distracting. I don't know if it was just me, but I found it very distracting and just very odd sometimes. Um, I feel like the makeup and hair department did Viola Davis dirty. The wigs did not look great on her. They were trying to do something with her teeth. I didn't understand what was going on with Viola Davis's teeth the entire time I was watching the show. It was just distracting. So yeah, this show, I think there was some potential there, but it kind of just was a little lacking to me for the most part. That being said, I'm kind of curious to see this show maybe attempt a second season, you know, pick three more first ladies and kind of see how that goes. Because I think the whole thing of this show, you know, depicting historical U.S. events through the eyes of the first lady is a really interesting concept, and I like that. You know, it really gets you to kind of humanize these first ladies and kind of be in their points of view and their perspectives. So yeah, the show just needs to kind of pick and choose what it needs to focus on and try to not be too meandering in places, not be too preachy, and then I think it'll work. At number 30, The Witcher: Blood Origin. Set in the elven world 1,200 years before The Witcher, centering on the origins of the very first Witcher. Starring Lawrence O'Farrane, Sophia Brown, and Michelle Yeoh. Whew, oh boy, you guys, another disappointment of a show. I love The Witcher, you guys, okay? I love The Witcher. I had a bit of a rough start with season one. Season one was a bit hit or miss for me, but I still enjoyed season one. And then I just absolutely got hooked and obsessed with season two of The Witcher. So I kind of came out of season two of The Witcher, like kind of this high that I had with it, kind of going into The Witcher Blood Origin, thinking, ooh, yes, I'm going to be all into this, I'm going to love it. Alas, no. The Witcher Blood Origin, I don't know what to say about the show. It's because I feel like I'm kind of repeating everything I've heard other reviewers say about it, but the thing is, other reviewers are very right. This show is very inconsistent with kind of the world building of what's been established in the original Witcher show, if that makes sense. There's a lot about this show. It's calling itself The Witcher, but there's not really too terribly much about it that's making me think of the original Witcher show. The costuming doesn't really match up. Architecture, like how certain buildings look, architecture doesn't really mesh together with the original show. There's just a lot of weird stuff about this show that sometimes it looks too modern, if that makes sense. There's things that look way too modern and not fantasy enough, if that makes sense. There were some occasions I was sitting thinking this felt more like Star Wars. You know how kind of that look Star Wars has? Star Wars has kind of a fantasy look to it to some degree, but also a very modern kind of futuristic look. And sometimes The Witcher had that look, like a modern futuristic sort of thing, and I didn't quite understand it. And the thing is, this show was only, what, 6 episodes? I believe this show was only, no, 4. That's right, it was only 4. Oh my god. I'm sitting here giving it too many episodes. This show was only 4 episodes, and I think it was originally supposed to be a little longer, but they ended up cutting out a lot of episodes, and it's very noticeable. Very noticeable, very obvious. Um, a lot of the plot is super fast paced. You're introduced to all the characters very rapidly, and all these characters are coming together to form a sort of fellowship, a sort of fellowship, if you will, to fight back against this evil in their world. And the thing is, you don't know a damn thing about these characters except for like 2 of them, kind of your 2 main people, and every other character is just so bland, and you don't really know them. I never learned anybody's name, unfortunately. How am I supposed to be all into this fellowship that teams up to fight back against evil when I don't really know them all personally? I don't have any sort of personal connection to them. So yeah, this show unfortunately felt rather flat, and I left the 4 episodes. I felt like I didn't learn anything that helped enhance my understanding of the world of The Witcher. You know, so if I had to say, should you give this show a shot? I mean, if you love all things Witcher, check it out, but this is absolutely not necessary viewing to understand anything in regards to The Witcher. And you know what's terrible? There was a animated cartoon that aired a few years ago called The Witcher Nightmare of the Wolf, I believe it was called. That animated cartoon was simply outstanding and so good, and I felt like that really gave me a good idea of kind of some history and background of the world of The Witcher. And that's pretty bad that an animated cartoon was way, way better and better quality than The Witcher Blood Origin. At number 29, The Essex Serpent. Follows London widow Cora Seaborn, who moves to Essex to investigate reports of a mythical serpent. She forms a bond of science and skepticism with the pastor, but when tragedy strikes, locals accuse her of attracting the creature. Starring Claire Danes, Tom Hiddleston, Frank Delane, and Clemence Posey. I really wanted to enjoy The Essex Serpent, you guys. On the surface, The Essex Serpent looks beautiful. It's an absolutely gorgeous, beautiful show. And there were certain things about the show that worked for me. The big thing that worked for me was definitely this whole battle and discussion in regards to science versus religion. Because you have the main character of Cora, played by Claire Danes. Cora is independent, especially for this time period, being the late, what is it, the very late 1800s, right? She's very independent in her own way for a woman during this time period, and she's all into science. She really likes discovering like ancient bones and creatures and stuff like that. So when she goes to Essex and she's greeted by this community that's very superstitious and very highly religious. And she meets the local pastor, played by Tom Hiddleston's character, and he's a man who's very much kind of at war with himself with science versus religion. He's a pastor, for crying out loud, but he is not entirely superstitious and highly religious like the rest of the community. He's much more kind of subdued with how he kind of teaches religion to this community. He's not ignorant, and he doesn't sit and solely base what's in the Bible as absolute truth and whatnot. He's willing to look scientifically at things too. So that's kind of where the mutual attraction that he has with Claire Danes' character comes into play. They're both kind of at war with science versus religion. So I think the show pulled that off remarkably well. The whole conflict within the characters and within this really small local community with science versus religion, reality versus superstition and whatnot. The show did that great. Where the show kind of started falling apart was definitely just some of the character stuff, kind of the romance angle, things that start going on between Claire Danes' character and Tom Hiddleston's character. So a lot of stuff was just really rapidly gone through, and sometimes the plot was just rather kind of just too slow for me. And I felt like all the really good stuff started happening near the end. And it's like I wish the show had maybe cut out a few episodes and condensed some of the plot. I don't think the show needed to be as long as it was. If anything, the show could have possibly been maybe like a 2-hour movie, maybe a little bit more than that, maybe like a 2.5-hour movie, something like that. It didn't need to be as long as it was, unfortunately. So yeah, Essex Serpent, definitely another disappointment of the year. I still liked it though, it was still fine for what it was. I could easily sit and have another rewatch of it years from now, just to look at Tom Hiddleston, to be quite honest. At number 28, Dangerous Liaisons. A pair of scheming ex-lovers attempt to exploit others by using the power of seduction in 18th century France. Starring Alice Englert, Nicholas Denton, Clarice Van Hoyten, and Leslie Manville. I definitely have some conflicted feelings about Dangerous Liaisons, you guys. It's a show that the first half of the show, I had a rough time with it. I was actually a little bored. I'm not gonna lie. I was honestly a little bored with the first half, and I just didn't quite understand kind of the point of everything that was going on. And more than anything, I absolutely did not like the main characters, played by Alice Englert and Nicholas Denton. I did not like their characters at all. Weirdly enough, though, the show started kind of changing for me around the halfway point, and that's where I started finding myself finally starting to enjoy the show. And once some of the plot threads and character threads started kind of weaving together and making a little bit more sense, that's when I kind of had that, okay, I see now what's going on here and how everything's tied in and connecting. I see kind of the point, Unfortunately, though, it took until the halfway point of the show for me to start really getting into it. And it's a shame. The show has been canceled. Starz has already come out and said, yep, it's canceled. And I mean, it is kind of a shame because I would have loved to have seen what a season 2 would have done now that a lot of stuff finally got rolling. It's like a lot of the plot stuff and character stuff, it got rolling a little too late in the show. And I think a lot of viewers were kind of in that same ground as me, that the first half was just a little too slow and boring and just what the hell's going on? I don't like these people, It was just a little too late, and I think a lot of people had fallen off the show by that point, but it did. I think it honestly started getting better, much better through the halfway point. And that's what I did. I started finding the characters a lot more sympathetic and a lot more interesting, and yeah, like I said, I didn't like them for the first half because I found what they were doing just incredibly petty and ridiculous, and just their back and forth. Like I said, they're a pair of ex-lovers, and they're kind of doing these mind games with each other, using seduction. It's like, do you love each other? Do you hate each other? I'm confused. But once again, a little too late by the second half, unfortunately, and it did get canceled. But yeah, I'm just not quite sure how to tell people how to watch this show. Give it a shot if you want. And I do gotta give this as a warning. I mean, I have never read the book Dangerous Liaisons, and I have never even seen the movie Dangerous Liaisons, the one that has, Glenn Close and John Malkovich. I have never seen that movie, and yeah, this show is supposed to be like a prequel to all of that. So maybe that was part of my confusion too. I just felt left out of the loop. I didn't understand maybe the future of these characters that would help maybe inform their current selves. I don't know. I have to maybe give the movie a shot and maybe rewatch the show, and maybe my thoughts have changed. I don't know. At number 27, Pam and Tommy. Follows the story of Pamela Anderson and Tommy Lee's relationship, going back to their whirlwind romance that started with them marrying after only knowing each other for 96 hours in 1995, leading to their infamous sex tape. Starring Lily James and Sebastian Stan. You know what? Out of everything that is on this listing, this ranking, Pam and Tommy is definitely what I would consider a guilty pleasure show. Because in some ways, it's not actually that good of a show. It's not really that good of a show. But it's still one of those shows that, weirdly enough, hooked me and I got obsessed with episode after episode. it's a show that's showing these two people that aren't particularly very that likable. Uh, showing these two people that have this wild, insane Hollywood romance, if you want to call it a romance, and how they hook up and everything that leads to this infamous sex tape and whatnot. If you were a 90s kid like I was, I mean, this was all over the news. I mean, I didn't entirely understand the nuances of everything that was going on because I was still pretty young, but I do definitely remember this sex tape being all over the news back in the 90s. Um, so it's one of those stories that I think a lot of people are very familiar with, but I don't think we know all the nuances and ins and out of it and whatnot. Um, I think what works about this show is because sometimes the writing is not that great, sometimes it's a little just over the top and cheesy and corny. But I think what works about this show is definitely the performances of Lily James and Sebastian Stan. They really give it their all, and I really did truly believe they were Pamela Anderson and Tommy Lee. I think they were initially. I think we all had our doubts about the casting. We were like, "What the hell?" But once I started watching the show, I could see why these two were cast as these roles. I think they had really great chemistry together. They looked great. I didn't think they were distracting. Earlier, I was mentioning, Viola Davis's portrayal of Michelle Obama as being very distracting. I think these two were not very distracting. I didn't find anything about their hair, makeup, or teeth, distracting like I did Viola Davis's Michelle Obama. And I really just liked what the show was doing in general because I think the point of it, because I think a lot of us were like, what's the point of showing this story, who cares about these two? I think what the point of the show was ultimately was just to kind of show just the nature of Hollywood, how terrible Hollywood kind of is. These people who have these great, wonderful, wealthy, privileged lives, but their privacy is invaded. Their privacy is horribly invaded, and they're treated terribly. And then, yeah, especially Pamela Anderson, she was pretty much slut shamed and called a whore and stuff because of this tape. But no one cared about Tommy Lee. No one was sitting there calling Tommy Lee a whore and a slut. If anything, people were like, "Yeah, Tommy Lee, you go. You're our man." So I liked what the show was doing. It was kind of showing Hollywood during this time period. This one-sided nature that was put on women in Hollywood, but not on men. And I think that was nicely balanced out between Sebastian Stan and Lily James, and that's what kind of worked for me with this show. Once again, not a too terribly great of a show, but certain things about it did work for me. At number 26, Around the World in 80 Days. Gentleman adventurer Phileas Fogg sets out on a quest to travel around the world and back home in a period of 80 days. Starring David Tennant, Ibrahim Koma, and Leonie Bench. Around the World in 80 Days was such a quaint and charming show, you guys. It is definitely the epitome of what you would expect to be on PBS, on Masterpiece Theater here in America. It's everything that I love about British period dramas. This show, once again, quaint, charming, very British. I definitely primarily watched it for my absolute love and obsession with David Tennant. Let's be real. This show it's about a man played by David Tennant who it's like he wants to have a life of adventure and fun and craziness, but there's a part of him deep down that he's really holding himself back, and he really sees himself as a coward, and he sees himself as a bit of a fraud. And it's this journey of him going around the world in 80 days, of him trying to prove something to the people that he's around, other men that he's around, and also just a journey for himself, and a journey of self-discovery. And that's what this whole show is about. Even though the bulk of the show is definitely about this whole race around the world in 80 days, in some ways it's not really truly what it's about and what even really matters at the end of the day. It's a journey of self-discovery for all three of our main characters, what they're discovering about themselves, what they're capable of ultimately, because they don't realize what they're truly capable of until they're kind of put in certain predicaments and obstacles come in their way, and then that's when they really find out, oh, I'm actually kind of great at doing this, or maybe they even discover a vulnerability or weakness that they didn't realize. So it's a journey of self-discovery for all three of our main characters, and also just kind of this journey between them that happens, because all three of our main characters are very different. You have wealthy, privileged Phileas Fogg, played by David Tennant. He comes from a certain type of background, and then the character played by Ibrahim Koma, he's a black man, and he comes from his own type of history and background and whatnot. It's completely different from David Tennant's character. And then, yeah, our third character, played by Leonie Bench, she's a woman, so she has that obstacle in her way as being a woman during this time period. So I liked how we have three very distinct different types of characters, and they're each having to kind of deal with each other's differences that they've never had to come across before with other people, because they're always around the same type of people in their lives. So I really like this show. It going around the world in 80 days, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. I mean, that's kind of like the frame of the show. That's why you're watching the show. But yeah, the show has a lot more deepness and heart to it that I enjoyed particularly, because it definitely has a lot more character stuff going on where you really truly get to know these people. At number 25, Pennyworth, Season 3. It's 1972. Hired to rescue a young woman believed to be under the spell of a dangerous hippie cult, Pennyworth seeks help from his allies as they discover a sinister plot. Starring Jack Bannon, Ben Aldridge, Emma Patz, and Paloma Faith. Pennyworth is such an incredibly underrated show, you guys. You always hear so much hoopla about other uh, comic book TV shows, and poor Pennyworth is always kind of just lingering quietly in the background, and you just never hear many people talking about it. Pennyworth, I honestly find Pennyworth to be one of the better comic book type shows out there. I wish more people would sit and give it a chance. I mean, it has made it to 3 seasons, thank God. Every year when Pennyworth is on, I'm always worried about news of a cancellation for this show. If you don't know what Pennyworth is about, because like I said, not many people even watch this show, what Pennyworth is about, Alfred Pennyworth, the butler of future Bruce Wayne slash Batman and whatnot. I just love what the Pennyworth show does. It has its little shout outs and Easter eggs to the world of Batman, but in some ways, there's just absolutely nothing that even brings in Batman at all. Yes, you have Batman's mom and dad, Thomas and Martha Wayne, are definitely in the show. They're big, huge characters, but that's really it that you kind of get with the Wayne family. It's really entirely all about Alfred Pennyworth and his early career, and yeah, how we're kind of leading up to him, how he's going to be this badass butler, for Batman and whatnot. And yeah, this third season was really great. Not my favorite of the seasons. I do think seasons 1 and 2 are definitely the far superior seasons, but season 3 was definitely really great. It definitely gets a little bit more wacky, a little bit more zany. It's bringing in a bit more of that DC comic flair to it, which was kind of hilarious. Yeah, definitely a little bit more of a levity that got introduced this season. And yeah, let's cross our fingers it gets renewed for a season 4, you guys. At number 24, Willow. 20 years after vanquishing the wicked queen Bavmorda, the sorcerer Willow Ufgood leads a group of misfits on a dangerous rescue mission into the unknown. Starring Warwick Davis, Ellie Bamber, Ruby Cruz, Aaron Kellerman, Amar Shadha Patel, Tony Revolori, and Joanne Whaley. I'm going to start and say this. I did not even watch the original Willow movie, which was released back in, I believe, 1988. I just got around to watching that original movie, you guys. Literally, like, the week before this TV show came out. It occurred to me, I was like, you know what? I don't think I've ever seen that original movie. I perhaps maybe need to get myself acquainted with it before getting into this show. That being said, I don't think it's entirely necessary to watch the original movie. I think it definitely helps. The show does a good job of having flashback sequences to help clue you in on certain things. But other than that, you really don't need to have seen the movie. But I still would recommend it to kind of help you get a little bit more into the world building and whatnot. I personally really enjoyed Willow, you guys. I found it to be really fun and hilarious in its own way. It can definitely be a little campy, it can be a little cheesy, but that's kind of what I loved about it. It didn't take itself too seriously. It was I found it to be very, very hilarious. I loved the humor. Um, and I think a lot of people I think they're just kind of a little upset because it's not the movie to them. And yeah, it's not the movie. There's certain things about it that are kind of reminiscent to the movie, but it's definitely its own thing. This show is trying to appeal to a modern audience. You know what I mean? This is definitely not in any way that close to the original movie in some ways, in terms of kind of this atmosphere and tone of it. And what I just particularly like about the show, it's like the anti like, I don't know, Game of Thrones, if you will. You know, Game of Thrones is so dark and serious, and it's full of sex and blood and all this stuff. This show, it's definitely like the rated G family version of Game of Thrones. It's about a bunch of misfits. It's not about a bunch of heroes. You know, even the original Willow movie, it's not about a bunch of heroes. They're all still a bunch of misfits at the end of the day. They're all a bunch of people that really have no business being on a quest. Same with this show. It's all a bunch of people that really have no business being on any sort of quest. They're all not really good fighters or anything like that. Even our main character, Willow, he's not really truly that great of a sorcerer sometimes. They're all just a bunch of misfits that they're all just arguing and bickering the majority of the time, which I found hilarious. And it's kind of just a journey for all of them together, and kind of realizing the things that they're capable of, because once again, since they are a bunch of misfits and they're not really great fighters, it's like they're all kind of realizing what their certain types of strengths are that allow them to kind of get out of sticky situations and whatnot. I had a really fun time with Willow, and if it has another season, I'm definitely gonna watch. At number 23, The Offer follows producer Albert S. Ruddy's experiences during the making of The Godfather, starring Miles Teller, Matthew Good, Juno Temple, and Giovanni Ribisi. I really loved The Offer, you guys. Oh my god, I was just hooked week after week, episode by episode with this show. I did finally get around to watching The Godfather for the first time several years ago. You guys, I got late into The Godfather. I watched it years ago. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I definitely wanted to watch this show, which is all about the making of The Godfather. Kind of this historical fiction take on it, you know. And boy, oh boy, I did not realize there was all this drama behind the scenes. I think people who were around, because The Godfather came out back in the 70s, I think back in the 70s, I think a lot of this stuff was very well known, and people were probably very familiar with all of the backstage drama. But me, someone here in the, the 2000s and whatnot, the 2020s, I didn't know anything about all this backstage drama and all the effort it took to even get this movie up and going. There was a lot of just financial issues, a lot of casting issues, production issues, just all sorts of issues I had no idea about. And it really provided for an entertaining, engaging story about the making of The Godfather that I didn't know. And what I also liked about this show is not in the business of recreating anything about The Godfather. Whenever they are filming scenes from The Godfather, you never see what the actors are doing, what their performances are. You never see it. You can hear it. You're always watching the crew, the lighting guy or the director or the producer, whoever. You're always in that perspective of the crew perspective, and their experience watching these actors bring this movie to life, what's going to be a future iconic movie. They really see the future and potential of this movie, when all other people are like, oh, this is not going to be a good movie, it's going to lose us money. So yeah, in hindsight, we know how iconic this movie is going to be, how well it's going to do, all the Oscars it's going to get, So that's part of the fun and entertainment of watching this show, seeing all this backstage drama and knowing at the end of the day it's going to have a happy ending. At number 22, Miss Scarlett and the Duke, Season 2. Eliza Scarlett continues as Victorian London's only female detective, all while fighting her attraction to Scotland Yard Inspector William Wellington, starring Kate Phillips and Stuart Martin. Season 2 of this show was so fun, you guys. Oh my god, I just love Miss Scarlett and the Duke, Eliza Scarlett and Inspector Wellington. I love their wild and crazy back and forth. They're bickering, they're bantering. They are just so attractive together. It's like they secretly love each other, but they pretend to just hate each other for the majority on occasion. Once again, another just perfect show to be on something like PBS or Masterpiece Theater here in America. I love shows that deal with lady detectives. You guys, I'm a sucker for anything that deals with lady detectives. And then, yeah, plus a super attractive Scotland Yard Inspector. What's not to like, you guys? Season 2, I didn't like it as much as Season 1. I do think Season 1, there were certain plot things I enjoyed better. Season 2, I felt was a little bit slower, and I felt like there wasn't really too much of an overarching plot. There wasn't really something kind of going throughout the entire season that was really huge compared to like season 1, I found. But I am looking forward to season 3. We're getting season 3 early in 2023. I'm really looking forward to that. Hopefully maybe season 3 will make it up a little higher on my list next year. But yeah, season 2 was still really fun and entertaining. I loved it. Like I said, you watch this show for the relationship between Miss Scarlett and the Duke. You are watching this show for that drama, that love-hate back and forth between them. And at number 21, The Serpent Queen. Queen Catherine de' Medici tells the story of her life to a servant girl, revealing how she came to enter the French royal court at the age of 14 and how she learned to outwit the court and play her own game. Starring Samantha Morton. Ooh, I love the story of Catherine de' Medici, you guys. And I'm just so glad there is a whole freaking show for Catherine de' Medici. Yes, thank you. Catherine de' Medici is just one of those historical figures. A lot of times she's often kind of credited as being like a villainess of history, and she's sometimes credited for some big things that kind of happened in France during her reign of time. So yeah, I was really just hooked from the get-go with this show, and uh, the show, there were certain little things that were a little bit, there were some flaws. There were definitely some flaws with this show, because I do think the tone of the show, it wasn't very consistent with its tone, because I felt like the first half of the season kind of had some really good, dry, dark humor, and then the second half got kind of a bit darker in its humor, and the humor was a little less. So there were things about the tone in certain ways it was kind of filmed and shot that just felt a little consistent in both halves of the show, because the first half does have a younger Catherine de' Medici, and then the second half has an older Catherine de' Medici, obviously played by Samantha Morton. And speaking of Samantha Morton, bravo, Samantha Morton. Wow. Samantha Morton, she was born to play Catherine de' Medici. You guys, this is definitely her show. I loved seeing her with this leading role. Yeah, we don't have like a really hip, young, hot Catherine de' Medici. This is like a really realistic take on Catherine de' Medici, you know, who's more in her middle-age years and a mature woman dealing with mature things in her life, dealing with her children and Mary Queen of Scots and her husband and the French court. You know, I love the maturity of this show and whatnot. So if you love all things Catherine de' Medici, definitely please check out The Serpent Queen. So you guys, that is it for part 1 of me ranking all of the historical fiction and fantasy shows that I watched in 2022. Any of these shows on this particular list that you either loved or hated, or do you disagree with how I have them ranked, just let me know. So yeah, stay tuned for part 2 on Wednesday. So that's it for this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you like this video, you may like these other videos. Bye guys.